Sorry, I'm a bit of a... Thank you. So I hope this can be seen. Not sure if it can. Let me know by just audibly telling me if there's like any boxes on the screen.
It's perfectly visible.
Great, thanks so much. So I have the chat open. I'm not sure if that blocks anything, but do let me know in the chat if there are any questions. So hi everyone, thank you for coming. My name is Bea Legaspi. I'm part of the CA for Summer GI, and this is a workshop for rebuttals and responsive speeches. So before we start, just a few things for introduction. The first is everything that I'll be talking about here, just a disclaimer, are obviously things that I experienced, not necessarily the best way or the only way to do them. I've accumulated a lot of these things by also watching a lot of lectures, just pondering on my own experiences. And I'm certain that you also have your own experiences that matter and possibly are different from what I have. So since this is a workshop and not just, me speaking into a void, the best thing that I hope this workshop gives you is at least combining your lived experiences and my lived experiences, and then we can create better speeches together and better responses together. I personally love responses. Hopefully by the end of this workshop, you marginally like them a bit more as well. The second thing is, so I hope this can be somewhat more engaging. I have some exercises in between slides, so I'll possibly be asking you to type it out in the chat or just unmuting. If you have any questions, as I pointed out, do have the chat open, but if I'm not able to see it, you can raise it when I ask, or if it's a burning question, feel free to just unmute yourselves and just do it, because obviously it's a bit hard with Zoom and everything. So it's always just good to have more people on board. Lastly, in terms of the length of this lecture, so we'll be chatting a bit. It's like 5 to 7 in IST. So in between parts, we might have like 2 to 3 minute breaks. So if you need to go to the washroom or take some water, this is just a flag that we do have sanity breaks in between, just to make sure that everyone is absorbing things. If it's going too fast, let me know and I'll definitely make sure to adjust it as well. So yeah, hopefully we all have fun. I'm really excited. Rebuttals make my heart happy. Responsive speeches all the more. And that's what we'll be talking about today. So the way that this will go is we'll split into two. The first is we'll just talk about basics of rebuttal. So I think there are some people who, well, from what I recall, from what is talking about this tournament, there are some people who are at least this is probably the third tournament. For some people, maybe you have not experienced giving responses a bit more. If you do have experiences that you want to let me know, you can just privately message me to take that into account. But basically, we'll just run down through how rebuttals are made and then go through a bit more complexity as we have it. So how to layer rebuttals, common mistakes that people make, and actually making these responses. And then second part is we'll talk about reconstructing and responsive speeches. So as promised, so this is about rebuttals and responsive speeches. We'll talk about how the basics of rebuttal are employed within those responsive speeches. So it'll be very fun. I love them. I will flag here that I do think that the only non-responsive speech in debates are PM speeches, obviously because you can't respond in any speech in PM, but we'll chat a bit more about why we cluster them together. And then at the end, if there are any other questions that don't fit in, we can talk about that if we have the time. So firstly, we'll go off into basics of rebuttal. So I do want to ask what is rebuttal. If you guys have thoughts about what rebuttal is, you guys are free to type it in the chat. I think I find often that people ask, is there a difference between rebuttal and response or rebuttal and reply? Often these questions are very pedantic and very dictionary based. I personally feel like there's not a large difference, but just for the purposes of debate, I think rebuttals are engagements, responses, things that are either attacking the core argument of the opposing team or are defensive of what your previous speaker said. So if you're deputy prime minister or the second speaker on government bench, you will be protecting the PM speech through rebuttal, but you'll also be taking down the speech before you so that it's going to kind of make sure that you're winning the debate. So rebuttals do that, and that's the main goal that they have. It's very cohesive. Responses, I think, are more of like the individual parts that compose the rebuttals. Again, these are just different English words that for ESL speakers like me are a bit confusing, so it might be different from circuit to circuit, but I just wanted to flag that so that you guys also know how I might be using them within the round. The best way I think to visualize rebuttal, especially in debate, is, and this is a very interesting analogy that was told to me very early on. When you're giving a speech, it's kind of like you're making a building or you're trying to compete with someone else who's making a building. So if you're on government side, the PM speech builds the foundation. The LO speech takes away parts of that foundation and places it instead in their building. And then on DBM, you take out, again, very similarly, all the things that they stole from you, take out parts of the building that make it very strong, and instead use that to further your own argument. And that's just the way that it goes all the way until the web speeches, and then reply speeches just kind of frame out what already exists. So the important thing to note there is rebuttals are never just one-sided. They're never just saying why something is wrong, but they're always building up to your own like speeches, to your own stances. So hopefully that makes clear what rebuttals do within debates and why they are crucial. What we'll now talk about are just the goals of rebuttal and what they broadly are supposed to do within rounds. So a bit more clearly, there are 3 goals of rebuttal, and I unashamedly stole this from the Australasian Debating Training Initiative. I do think it's very helpful, and I added a bit more, so I just wanted to discuss this. The first goal of rebuttal is just directly attacking the other side. So 1 out of 3. The main thing that you do is either you prove that their claim is untrue. So if someone is claiming that, this house believes that former colonies should pay reparations to the countries that they formerly colonized, and the claim was that, but they, on opposition, for example, you're saying they don't have any moral obligation to care for them anymore because it's so far back in the past already. The response is to explain why that claim is untrue, or you can also just flip the harm. So if you want to explain why it's untrue, you can possibly explain why they do still benefit. If you want to flip the harm, aka proving why it's actually helpful for your side if it is true, then maybe what you can explain is, if it is the case that people feel very separate from their past histories or something similar to that, then maybe what you can try to prove is why this will likely be more effective in being able to construct development for a lot of previous colonies. So at the end of this, and I just want to be extremely clear about this, the first and foremost goal of rebuttal is trying to take down the opposing team, or if it is impossible to disprove why their claim is true, the important thing is to explain why this is something that is helpful for your side, even in that instance. I want to emphasize this very clearly. It's important to be comparative. And this is what I was talking about in the analogy about building or constructing a building. So if their claim is untrue, you have to explain on your side why your claim instead is true. If you flip the harm, you need to explain why that is good for your team and why that's bad for the other team. So I hope this is clear. We do have an example. So it's not a full-on motion, neither is it a full-on argument, but I do want to give a short exercise, and I hope people can type in the chat or unmute. So I'll ask you to disprove the claim. I'll give you around 30 seconds to read it out, or just type out your thoughts, but I'll explain what you have to do. So you guys can just give reasons for why this might be untrue in the chat, or you can unmute. Anyone can do it. So the first claim is the environmental groups will find it easier to push for more social change when they work with corporations. So again, it does not need to be a cohesive argument, cohesive case, cohesive response. Just try to disprove this claim. So I'll hopefully ask for people to type in the chat. And I'll wait now because I don't want it to be awkward. So just type or unmute yourselves. So I see someone unmuted, but I can't hear them. So that might be a me problem, not sure. But I'm hoping that you guys are responding to this. So I think 30 seconds have elapsed. So I hope that you guys have thought about possible ways to disprove this claim or to explain why it's untrue. You can still type in the chat. I'll read it out in a sec. But I think a few ways to explain why this claim might be untrue is to first say that, well, it's actually harder because the majority of the people that environmental groups pander to are people who don't like corporations. That is, environmental groups are composed of activists. A lot of their partnerships are based on people who have been displaced because MNCs are taking away their land, MNCs being multinational corporations. So what you can prove is why it's actually harder. On the flip side, you can say that if it is the case that they find it easier to push for more social change when they work with corporations, possibly corporations have an interest to care about them, even if you don't actively cooperate with them. So if their environmental groups are so popular in the world anyway, then there probably might still be an incentive for corporations to care about your environmental group or your advocacies. And that's why it's better if you care more about like non-corporations or care more about activists or people who are displaced by corporations, because that might mean that it's easier for you to get negotiations from corporations when you don't actively work with them. So that's one way to flip the claim. I do want to emphasize that I think this is more of disproving exercise. There are a lot of other ways to be able to disprove this. Obviously, aside from attacking the way that the demographics are created, you can possibly rebut or can possibly disprove the scale of that social change, and that's going to be the second possible goal of rebuttal. So the second goal of rebuttal is to prove that their argument is less important. And this is where a lot of the complicated words that I personally don't love using, but sometimes you have to use in debate. These are where things like that argument is symmetrical, or this claim is mutually inexclusive, or the delta of their side is not large, all come in. So what you usually do in rebuttal is, even if you agree that the social change exists, for example, in the previous case, what you explain is the harm possibly applies to their case as well. So if you're saying that it's easier to get or to push for social change when you are prominent, that possibly exists on either side, because you might still get some traction on either side. Or in a different scenario, for example, if you're trying to claim that if it's this house who gets the rise of cancel culture or something similar to that, if you're saying that this means that people are going to become more silent because they're always going to be held accountable, maybe you can explain why the harm is not necessarily exclusive, aka if people are going to still want to be protective of themselves, or people are becoming more empowered, if that's what the government team wants, then possibly the harm applies to their side as well. I want to be extremely clear here. There will be a lot of debates where teams agree on a goal. So there will be a lot of debates where you will both want to have better social change. There will be a lot of debates where you want to have better rights for people. And people will push different harms, but you need to pinpoint exactly where the difference exists. So if you're explaining that the harm applies to their side as well, what you have to explain is why there is a difference on your side and why that benefit matters. I guess a clear example would be if it's this house gets the academization of terms within social movements. So the debate is broadly like using things like critical race theory within social movements, and the Gov argument, for example, would be we regret the academization because it makes it less accessible to people. But then you say, but we're okay still with being able to have the terms. It's just that we're like regretting it. We would just want these terms to instead come from people who have the lived experiences. So I think what opposition can explain is things like lived experiences are also inaccessible to a lot of people because it's not the same for everyone. Like even if you say things like intersectionality for women's rights, without academization to make it equal to people, lived experiences of women from the global south and the global north are very likely to still lock out and make it inaccessible to different groups, meaning that you're unable to get traction for the social movement still, and therefore it becomes inexclusive. And then what you explain is, on our side, the marginal difference is academization, even if it might be unequal, even if it might be terminologies that are hard to access, are forced to be rational. That means that it's easier for you to equalize things because now you have to follow a methodology that is critically examined, as well as B, you get funding only when it is representative of people, and that's why there is a greater incentive for it to be a bit more equal. So hopefully that example made sense. But just broadly, the point for the first thing to note is you make their argument less important when you explain why it is inexclusive, and then you explain why. The part where it is exclusive is the one that matters, and that's what you're winning on. The second way that you explain why an argument is less important is just to mitigate their impact. So if it's this house regrets the rise of cancel culture, for example, and maybe you can't disprove, or maybe you can't symmetrize, or maybe you can't prove that the argument on how it silences people is inexclusive, you can explain that this is mitigated. Like obviously, on opposition side, for this house regrets the rise of cancel culture, maybe you can mitigate the way that people feel like they'll be canceled as speaking out by saying that there is still free speech laws. The cancel culture often just affects people who are like incredibly popular, and those are a minority of people, and therefore the ways that it affects them is probably not large. In the same motion of this house regrets the academization of language and terms within social justice movements, you mitigate the impact of government about how it's not accessible by saying, even if these terms are not as accessible, the things I pointed out earlier about how you will want to make it relevant to normal people, you'll want to make it be representative, because a lot of academicians and like researchers only get funding if their research gets broad support. So even if it might be complicated language, it's not going to be incredibly like terrible language, like epistemic access to the delta of this blah 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 blah. It's likely to be some of them that can still be explained within the academic research paper, and that's why the harm of accessibility for the language itself is not that massive. The third way that you prove that an argument is less important is by weighing it against your counterclaims. So, for example, you have to compare the best case of their side and the worst case of your side. I understand that these are often words that a lot of people hear: worst case, best case. Sometimes you kind of just ask, what does that mean? The important thing here is just best case means the most charitable version of their case. That is, maybe it is the case in the house regrets academization debate that you have less accessibility on op. It's harder for you to understand. Maybe you ignored all the mitigations. Maybe the mitigations don't work. Maybe it's not symmetric. Why is it that your claims are still good? So what you weigh out here is to say, in the best version of the gov case, they are likelier to get some level of social traction. In the worst case of opposition, maybe it's inaccessible, but it is better because you're able to attach a word to the experiences of people. So now it becomes movement or buy-in into the movement versus the value of being able to attach a label to it. Obviously, you have to explain why that is exclusive, but what you explain is, for a majority of minorities, it's probably more important for them to be able to identify with a value and to be able to identify with a phenomenon that they can understand and like make sense of, as opposed to having more people jump in if these people are unlikely to ever identify with it. That means that on the best version of government, maybe you have bigger social movements, but you're unable to make bills and laws that are actually targetive, because a lot of these are unable to recognize the lived realities of people that are often studied. So if you don't have a word to use for how intersectionality is, that often only comes because of academization, you're unable to get any form of change. You're unable to generalize the experience. You're unable to make sure that the laws that you do pass and the movements of the group are ever going to be targeted to what these minorities actually want. So obviously there is a lot more work to do there. I think it's a very fun debate, however, and that's why I'm always referring to it. But I hope it makes it clear when you are weighing it, it's either you explain why A, you care more for vulnerable groups, which is what you just did about minorities, or you explain why you affect more people as opposed to less people on their side. So if you explain that there is a greater net good for more people, you win on weighing because you explain why it is important for you to care for more people. If it's a this house food debate, you explain why the state has an incentive or has the obligation to care for the majority of people within society, even if you take the trade-off. Or B, if it's about vulnerable groups, what you explain instead is why the state has an obligation to care for them. If it's this house believes that, or a third-party debate, that means that it's a value judgment debate. You explain why it's okay to take those trade-offs because the things that you are losing are definitely not worth what you're gaining coming from golf. Hopefully that makes it clear. So just to recap, the first goal of rebuttal is directly attacking the case, proving why it's untrue and explaining why your case is true, or flipping it, aka explaining why even if it were true, why it's still helpful for your side. The second goal of rebuttal is explaining why the argument is less important, even if it's true. You do it through explaining that the harms exist on their side as well, through mitigating their impact and weighing it against your own counterclaims. And the important thing here is sometimes there will be debates where you agree on things or it's going to not be very clear what the difference is. In response, you need to be very, very certain about what the difference is. Often you will understand whether or not the debate will be a bit messy in prep. If you're having a hard time trying to figure out what the difference is, that probably means that the other team is also having a hard time. Make sure you are clear on what the difference is in prep. Yeah. So short exercise. Let's assume the previous claim to be true. Environmental groups will find it easier to push for more social change when they work with corporations. So let's say all the things you guys thought about are not enough to take down this claim. Maybe it's just true that they'll find it easier to push for more social change. If you are on the side that argues against working with corporations, how would you weigh this out? So you're free to type in the chat or you're free to also just unmute. Hopefully people are typing, but just in the interest perhaps of time, I'll also just give my thoughts on this. If anyone has thoughts, you guys can also again send in the chat and I'll read it out. So if you are on the side that argues against working with corporations, how you can weigh this out is maybe you get more social change, but you dilute the movement's stance because now you're working with the same corporations who belch out pollution into the air, who are unable to save seas and are therefore actively participating in killing turtles, which your environmental group probably cares about. You are allowing oil extraction companies to fund your movement, and therefore it's harder for you to call them out. That is the most important value compared to pushing for more social change, because while you can get very minimal forms of social change, you're unable to change that's a lot of change. You're unable to have environmental, erasing the environmental damage that a lot of these corporations do, because you're unable to call them out, meaning that more vulnerable groups within developing countries and the global south are likely to experience rising sea levels because you're unable to care for them anymore. These lives are going to be the most valuable in the debate because they're the most vulnerable actors, but also secondly, you're unable to call out corporations, meaning that you're also less likely to be legitimate. So you're going to have more people, sure, but less activists who care more about your movement because they feel like it's a betrayal of their principles. So the most important people to care about are the people who are most animated or people who are more likely to do protests. The people that you get when you work with corporations don't really care about that anymore, and that's why you're unable to, even if you have some level of social change, it's mitigated because that level of social change is unable to ever be effective. So I think those might be two ways that might help in that instance. I think in this regard, you kind of have to give up the weighing on more people, so you prioritize the vulnerable people. You kind of have to either pick and choose the ways that you weigh it. It's either vulnerable or more people. It's very, very rare that you can do both weighings, but in the instance, it's really just highlighting what they should do or what the actor in the debate should have a moral obligation to care about. Or if it's an actor debate that is not about an actor that has benevolent interests, maybe it's an explanation of why it might be politically better for them, aka the second way that we provided about social change. hopefully I'm still making sense, just because I do understand that I speak a bit fast sometimes, or it's a bit hard to understand me at times. So just let me know if I should like take it a bit slower. But otherwise, it seems that there aren't questions for the second goal, so we'll just move into the third goal. So the third goal of rebuttal is to prove that their argument does not have enough analytical links. There is a reason why this is the third goal. It's the least impactful way that you have rebuttal. Because if you are DPM and you say, leader of opposition did not have any analytical links to explain their case, then, DLO can just add the links. And then you just wasted your time calling it out. So you have to be very strategic with how you use this. You have to explain why this is uncreditable in comparison to your case, and explain instead why you gave the analytical links. So as I point out in the slide, you need to make sure that you're not relying on this, because if they just fill out the analysis in the latter speakers, then you lose the advantage. I want to point out that I do think this is a very good response when you are whipped, because they will be the when you're whipped, because they're the last speakers on the bench. So I just want you guys to remember this slide, because I think we'll have to rejoin the link to continue the session. So yeah, I'll see you guys in a bit. So yeah, we'll just rejoin the Zoom in a sec, or let's see if we can host or find another Zoom that might not end.
Yes, it's visible.
Great. So thank you so much for recording. So I think we can start now. So we dropped off by talking about how proving the argument does not have analytical links might not be enough. So what I was saying was, and I think what you dropped off was about whips. And we'll talk a lot more about this later on when we talk about the responsive speeches themselves. But I would say that this is most clearly launched when you are the last speaker of the bench, because obviously if you're gov whip, op whip can't supply the analytical links anymore. If you're op whip, obviously gov reply, who is the only speaker who can respond to you, or who can even just speak after you because they can actively respond, will not be able to pull this in. So use this strategically, that is, use this near the end of the bench, or if you do want to launch it, for example, at DPM, use it after everything else. And that just adds another layer for questioning for the judge, because obviously if DLO has to respond to so much of DPM's case, the problem there is they're not going to be able to rebuild the DLO speech. So they're not going to be able to fill in the blanks. So it's just good to use this strategically. That's just what I wanted to emphasize for this particular slide. Analytical links alone do not win or lose you the debate. They definitely change margins, and they definitely, if added on to the other parts of the response, will be a very, very effective response. But you need to make sure that you're launching them correctly. So recap, 3 goals of rebuttal. The first is directly attacking. The second goal of rebuttal is weighing it out. And the last goal of rebuttal is to prove that there are not enough analytical links. Everything at every point should be comparative ideally. That is, if you're explaining why something is untrue, you explain why that is true instead on your side. If you're explaining the weighing, explain why that weighing is better for your side, or why you provide for more people or more vulnerable actors. And then lastly, you need to be comparative in analytical links. Explain why on your side you were able to give enough analytical links for it. Explain why it was likely. I'm not gonna give a full lecture on analytical links as well, just because I feel like this is reliant on things like constructing a case, making sure you have the necessary questions. But I will refer you to the case construction lecture in ADTI by Amir and Natasha Moore. The necessary questions there are filled out filling out the premise, which we'll talk about in a sec, premise or starting point, why the premise is true, explaining the harms and benefits, explaining why it's exclusive, explaining why it's important. Those 5 parts are all parts of analytical links. If there's something that's missing, that's what you can attack. So hopefully that's clear. The exercise here is just spotting the missing links. So you guys can just type in the chat. Sorry, I was trying to open the chat. So you guys can type in the chat or unmute. I'll read out the statement and you guys can absorb it, try to figure out what you think is missing. So what I'll explain, and you can explain why it matters. So what I'll first say is environmental groups should work with corporations because currently they don't have enough resources. Corporations will give them enough money to be sustainable when they work together. So what do you think is the missing link and why does it matter if you are rebutting this particular speech? So I'll give you guys some time to just let this, let this be absorbed. Okay, so you can still unmute and you can still chat if you have additional thoughts. But I'd say that what is missing here is why it will likely be sustainable. So you give the reason for why they'll give you resources, but you don't explain why this will be something that will exist in the long term. And meaning that that's where you can enter all the other responses about how, oh, the impact is minimal because it's possibly just in the short term, or you can give structural analysis for why it's unlikely to be monetary in nature, or it's unlikely to ever be massive in nature, or like why it's not likely to be effective enough for you to achieve your goals, aka some of those resources might just be very passive, meaning that even if you do have some money, you're not able to activate it to actually use it to lobby. Oh, so the second thing I'd point out is there isn't actually a mechanism here. So it's unclear why, if you have more resources, you'll automatically be able to get to the social change that is claimed. And I think thirdly as well, what you can point out is why they never explained why this is exclusive. Cool. There's also nice. So there's also a missing link here that was pointed out. How will this provision of resources not be contingent on extremely censoring your work? Which is, I think, correct. So you have. So I think what is also missing from the particular statement is a comparative. So when explaining why you'll be likely to censor the work, the statement hasn't weighed out why that matters, and that's also something that you can point out if you're responding to this particular speech. So thank you so much, Abhinav. So great. I think more or less those are the 3 main goals, and I hope that we've been able to use them broadly or apply them correctly for the majority of people in the call. So that's just the very basic parts of rebuttal. So the last note I just want to say before we end the very first part of a lot of parts is just be charitable. There are too many debates where sides end up having deadlocks or unresolvable clashes because teams are very, very insistent. To avoid this, make sure to rebut the best version of the argument. Obviously, you can still call them out if they miss out stuff, but be charitable. Make sure that you're giving them. There's always a layer where you give them what they want and explain why that is still not enough. So weighing is very valuable. It's underrated and should be in a lot of responsive speeches. So hopefully that's clear. If you guys have any questions on basic steps for rebuttal, let me know. I'll give you a sneak peek of the next one. The next one is how you put them into coherent response. But if there are questions right now, I can take them. So yeah, you guys can just type in the chat, or you guys can raise your hand, or you can unmute, etc. Sorry, I'm also just timing myself just to make sure I'm not overtiming, just so I know, because I'm in a different time zone. So let me know as well if you feel like it's a bit too long. So I think there might not be as many questions, but if you do still have questions, you can just drop in the chat and we'll go back to it. Cool? Great. So we'll go next to how you put them in a coherent response. So you might be thinking, okay, Bea, I know everything about like the goals of rebuttal, but I don't know how to make them coherent or cohesive in a speech. So how this will go, or how this part will go, is I'll just have a lot of questions that people often have in rebuttal, and we'll just chat about a lot of them. So I'll just move my screen. So the first thing that people have trouble with when constructing a coherent response is not being sure what you have to do. So if, for example, you're LO and you're listening to PM, or if you're DPM and you're listening to LO, the point is you're listening to the speech before you, what should you do? The first thing to note is you need to take down notes. Drop your pen on the speaker before you start speaking. Make sure that the things that you already need to build are already built. Listening matters. I think responses are probably more important than the additional layer that you might add. So you need to understand that you need to make sure that you understand the argument and how it's explained. So step 0 of responding, you need to know what you're responding to, and ideally you should be representing this correctly. I just read out the chat. So there's a question in the chat. The question is about the social movements argument. So I'll just go back to that because I think it's quite important. So the rebuttal is the social movements will become extremely dependent on corporations gradually, and they'll start leveraging their position more and more. I think that's a very good response. I'd say it's a extremely valid response. You have to explain why it will likely happen, but I think this falls into the flip, which is the first goal of rebuttal. So I think it's very smart and very sharp. So yeah, great job. I do think it's a valid response. Great. So thank you so much, Rinda. I think that definitely is I like it. Like I'm not sure about you guys, but when I see good responses or when I hear good responses to arguments, it makes my heart quite happy. On a side note, there's this Filipino word called kilig. It's like when you're really happy about something, and that just made me kilig. Yeah. So anyway, going back to the slide about what should you do before your speech. So it's important to take down notes, as I pointed out. But there are some troubles that people have when they are listening, and that is, what if I don't do this? What if I don't understand? Or what if it's hard for me to take note? Or what if you're just completely overwhelmed by material, by an opponent? And I'll make this a bit more aligned with my experiences. You guys can also share your experience or if you have questions about this. But I find that when I was starting out, or even until now, when I'm responding to a very good team, I end up being a bit overwhelmed by what they're saying. And so no matter how much I listen, the words just don't enter my brain, right? I've had that trouble. I was in a tournament like yesterday when I was competing in an out round, and it was also quite hard for me because the round was very good. And it might be quite overwhelming to respond to a speech that might be hard to understand. So a few tips for this. The first is, if you're having trouble tracking down what they're saying, so you might be responding to a speaker who speaks very, very fastly. So they might like be like, oh, I have 7 response, the first response, that's how it might end up seeming like to you if they're speaking too quickly. If that is the case, I would say prioritize writing down notes for the speech on a separate piece of paper. You don't need to care about the granular parts of the case, like the exact wording, but you do need to know what the layers are, because they're gonna punish you, especially in 3v3, if you don't respond to it very well or if you don't like acknowledge it. So you need to have enough notes to acknowledge it. Like just make sure you write down the notes effectively and efficiently. So you need to force yourself to listen. I think that's the first fix, like brute force. The second fix is, if your problem is being overwhelmed or the mental barrier of responding, it might help to practice outside of rounds to be able to quickly think on your feet. We'll cover this a bit more. Ideally, when we talk about the responsive speeches, so which is part 3. But what I'd say is the actual exercises that might help are things like being able to practice answering POIs, or like trying out exercises where you give a speech but without any prep, and people like you can't turn down POIs. So what that forces is for you to not like take too long in being able to come up with a solution. You need to be snappy in the ways that you respond, especially if you're going to have to respond to the speaker before you, if you're leader of opposition or deputy prime minister, which requires a lot of flexibility because you're the first speaker to respond to the speech of the other side. So practicing helps, but also secondly, if you're actually in the round, what helps is, and I didn't put this, but what helps is just to like try to extract keywords. So if your problem is you can hear them, but you can't understand it, isolate the words that you can understand. And to an extent, you might be able to craft the case there. Like if it's just like something that's so weird, like principle of something, an impact of something, if that's just how it goes into your brain, make sure that you can kind of listen to the outro because usually they'll highlight it, or listen to the intro because that's usually where they put the main case, and then just try to piece together what it looks like. Important thing to note, if you don't understand it, if you can track it, then it's probably likely that it's just undecipherable for the judge. Sorry guys, it's a bit hard to say very long words, but yeah, if it's something that is very, very hard to understand and you tried the first two fixes, possibly just likely that it's not gonna be understandable by the judge, and you can just like try to frame around it. The third fix is, if your problem is understanding the case, aka you do feel like it makes sense but you can't understand it, ask your partner to give a brief summary of the speech if you're having trouble understanding. So this usually is good because you are DPM, for example, doing the responsive speech. There's one speaker before you, like the PM speaker, who can listen to the LO speech and help you understand this. If you are leader of op, you still have op whip who doesn't need to like figure things out easily because they can write their speech down during your speech. So you can ask them for what the actual case was, and that makes it easier for you to understand it. I personally subscribe to this. I have a teammate. Oh yeah, I put this here as a reminder for myself. If we have time, I have a short story of my friend's experience in a tryout. I don't think we actually have time, but I'll just make it really quick. There was a time where we had our internals for tournament, and the problem was the whip of our team, or sorry, the whip of the other team on our side, slept through the whole debate. So it was right after lunch, they slept through it, meaning they only got to the debate during the deputy leader of opposition speech. They were up whip. They had the highest speaks and won the debate because, and this is not ideal at all, it is not good, I'm not saying you should do it, but what they did was, even if they couldn't understand parts of the case, what the other members of the team did was to explain what the line of analysis was and what the parts of the case were. They explained to them what they were unable to hear and why it's important, or why the other side thought it was important, and they just were able to frame it out. Of course, this is, again, as I pointed out, not great, but the important thing is, if you really are confused, you always have partners to help you out, and that's the point of the bit. I'm sorry for the very short story, but I do think it's quite important. So just to recap, the first thing to note is just force yourself to write down notes. Drop your pen if you have to. Drop your pen, aka not like stop building. You have to listen to the speech right before you track it as if you are a judge. Second tip is, practice outside of rounds, or just listen to the words that they're saying, the words that you might make sense of, craft the case from that. The third is, if your problem is understanding the case, you have partners who can help you. If worst case scenario, you still don't understand it, you can take a POI during your speech. During your speech, if you are rebutting the wrong thing, they're probably most likely to give you the correct case. So like, if you are misrepresenting them, they're very likely to raise a POI. That's wrong. This is actually the case. That might help you understand it a bit better. Might just help you be able to adapt to the responses, especially if it's quite crucial. So hopefully this helps. Don't sleep through rounds, but in the case where your brain might as well have been sleeping through it because you're unable to understand, hopefully these 4 tips help. So next question. Pause. So I guess this is a pause because I know when I was making this PowerPoint that I would be talking too much. The pause is, do you have other troubles when encountering rebuttals? Feel free to type in the chat if there are any other experiences that you've had that made you a bit scared of responding, or just if you're okay with responding, but you're having trouble with other parts, aka rebuttal. I'll note here an observation I have with just a lot of people in debate. It's very often that within teams, you have people who are responsive speakers and you have people who are constructive speakers. Like not because of roles, but because of the ways that they speak and prep. So in my team, and my team is currently doing AP, there's one speaker in the team who supplies the direction of the case and what the stance should be. There's another speaker who supplies the mechanisms. They collaborate together to make sure that the mechanisms are clear, that the mechanisms make sense, and that the mechanisms are many. And then there's another speaker in prep who acts either as a devil's advocate, who questions the parts of the speech and who gives the rebuttals and gives the case from the other side and how you can possibly respond to that. What I usually observe is the people who are more responsive have some trouble building the case. And that's why oftentimes in British parliamentary format, in the format where you only have two speakers, so opening government, opening opposition, closing government, closing opposition, it's very likely that the first speaker is possibly the one who constructs the case a bit more, who is more comfortable in building. The second speaker is the one who responds a bit more. Yeah, so that's very common in BP. It's also very common in AP. If you're more of a responsive speaker, oftentimes you're either placed at depth or at whip, because the crucial part in AP is the first speaker, especially for building and front loading. So I'm not sure how many people in this call are more responsive speakers who already feel comfortable with it, but have trouble proving the comparative, or how many of you are more constructive speakers who have trouble doing rebuttals. But either way, if you have trouble with any of them, you can type in the chat or unmute and let me know. But it does seem like there aren't much questions for troubles with encountering rebuttals. If you do have questions, again, you can type in the chat, but actually, I guess this wasn't a pause because I just kept talking anyway, but yeah. So I think we've covered how to do it in terms of like writing notes, but the next part of cohesive rebuttal is actually giving the rebuttal. So I want to note that the game of debate is, yes, about finding the good arguments. Yes, it's about making arguments rhetorical and making them make sense. Yes, it's about luck as well, but more often than not, debates are won within limitations. So debate is defined competitively by the time limits. You only have 15 minutes in British parliamentary format to prep. That is how you come up with the best arguments, the most refined arguments. Yes, you only have 30 minutes in AP. That is how you come up with the strongest arguments for the bench, and you're able to outweigh everything else, figure out the setup, etc. Yes, you only have 7 minutes in a speech. You have to prioritize. So when you are giving a response or a rebuttal in a speech, you need to prioritize what you want to respond to, specifically the strongest parts of the opposing team's case. So sometimes you'll know this because you logically understand how to do this. Either it's explicitly said by the speaker. So it's either that they say, the most important value in this debate is about protecting minorities. We win on that. So you might understand that the most important thing is the value of protecting minorities. So you have to take it down for all the 3 goals that we talked about. Or you can know it instinctively by taking down the biggest push. So maybe they don't declare that, but maybe teams will say, we'll spend so much time on explaining why minorities are better off. I want to note that the number of airtime that a speaker gives to a part of the case might not necessarily mean that it's the most important thing, but it is a good indicator of what they're trying to build. So if they spend so much time on the mechanism, they're probably trying to build why this is correct or why this is true. That might be an indicator for you to know that this is something that is needed to be responded to. The most important questions to ask is, A, what does the opposing team need to prove? Or B, what argument is hurting your case the most? So both of these questions are things you can ask in prep. So if it's, again, this house regrets the rise of cancel culture, what opposition has to prove is why there is a value to cancel culture and why the counterfactual is likely to be worse. Obviously, there are other parts of that, but that is one of the main things that they have to do. If it's this house believes that environmentalists should not work with corporations, or this house as environmentalists would not work with corporations, what government needs to explain is why you are able to survive independent of corporations and why it will work. Opposition needs to explain why corporations are good actors in that instance, or at least are able to achieve the social movement's goals or the environmentalist goals. If it's this house regrets the academization of social movements, then what you need to prove on Gov is why the alternative would have been better, why it would have been successful, and why it would have been, I guess, perhaps, if that's the clash that you want, more accessible to more people and therefore generate better social change. On the flip, opposition needs to explain why lived experiences are not substantially better, why academization is good for people, and why that's better able to achieve the goals of the movement. So when you figure out what they need to prove, you know what you have to respond to. The second thing is when you listen to the speech, you have to understand what's hurting your case the most. So the best tip I've had for this, or I've heard from this, is in prep, whips should be writing notes. Deputies should also be writing notes, not to build the case, because obviously you have to have the first speaker, because their speech is possibly the most crucial constructive speech in the round. But what you need to do is try to figure out what is your main claim, why is that claim important, and what are the things that will hamper that claim from being true. So if it is that the claim is reliant on proving that you have a mechanism, you need to make sure that that mechanism is solidified. You need to make sure that the mechanism of the opposing team is like not likely to co-opt your value. You need to explain why that mechanism that you have is the only way to achieve this, and that is the burden of the debate. So you need to really, really make sure that what's hurting your case the most is dealt with, and that's how you prioritize it. So again, you prioritize the things that you need to prove to win and what's hurting your case the most. So if they're in the middle of the Venn diagram, it's automatically the first thing you have to deal with. If it is something that you don't really need to prove, but it's hurting you don't really need to prove to win, but it's being used against you by the opposing team, maybe you can say that's second. If it is something that is hurting your case but very minimally, so like very just hurting the very large part, like very small part of the case, then you can deprioritize it. Prioritize the most important thing, the most crucial thing, the core of the debate. Bottom line, rebut what you need to rebut, not what is easy to rebut. Don't be nitpicky. Don't pick and choose what you have to like rebut. Sometimes it might work, but most often it's very sneaky and not just great in responses. The best judges, and I would say most judges, probably can figure out whether or not you're being nitpicky. If an argument is scary, that means that the argument is probably winning the opposing team the debate. That probably should be setting off alarms in your brain, and therefore you should view this to be an especially important thing to respond to. Cool? So hopefully that's clear. But then there's another question. What if, before you move on to the question, I guess you can just go through the example. So the example is, this house believes that the feminist movement should support traditionally feminine activities as empowering, e.g. makeup. And I'll read out the Gov argument, but I'll let you guys think a bit more about what matters most. So you don't need to respond to this, but you have to figure out what is the most important part of the Gov argument, okay? So Gov argument. At present, the feminist movement struggles with getting support because they're seen as too radical. It's good for the feminist movement to support things like makeup because these are what most women are socially conditioned to accept, and therefore you are likely to get more support from women, and thus you get more social and political capital. Even if makeup can be bad for self-image, the feminist movement is able to reclaim these narratives, and thus it'll be better. So the question is, what matters the most in the Gov argument? So I'll wait for you to type it out. But I will just mute myself because I'm gonna like cough a bit. Hi. Okay, sorry. I am a sickly being and I cough. But I'll assume that you guys are like thinking a bit about it.
And so when we say what matters the most, do we like need to present what is the impact that they are rooting for, or like something else?
Yeah. Like if the impact is the one that matters the most, then you can say that that is probably what you have to take down. That makes sense?
Okay, so like the most what is mattering the most for them is to like gain more support and gain more political capital.
Correct. Yeah, that's perfect. And also there is also a comment in the chat. So it's the propagation of the movement, the spread of the movement. So yes, that is perfect. That is great. Yeah, that makes me all click and happy. So both of those things are kind of similar. Political capital is kind of the same as the propagation of the movement. They are like kind of different ways of explaining it, but that is the correct answer. And yeah. So I'll just explain the answer. So political capital is the main mechanism, aka they say that you get social change because the movement spreads. So what you do in response to the Gov argument is explain why the political capital cannot be gained. So you use the goal number one that we had at the start of the lecture or at the start of the workshop, and then you say why the political capital is minimal, even if it happens, goal number two, and then you lastly explain what parts of the case were missing to achieve the goal and mitigate the op harm, which is goal number three. So after each layer, you then explain your comparative, and that's how you respond to them. So great job, guys. That you guys are able to take down these arguments. I think this was a motion from major recently. I'm not super sure where. I remember stealing it from a major at Hello Motion. So, great job, guys. So now we'll go into what if you can't identify what matters the most. So unfortunately, there are some speeches that aren't as clear cut. So it's like unlike the previous one where the mechanism was very highlighted, there are some where it's just really, really confusing. And these are often when it's like a philo motion where it's just really different frameworks for different people, or it's an econ motion or an IR motion that is very principled, well, not principled, but very basics heavy. So understanding what an IPO is, understanding what market share is, understanding how growth works, degrowth works, or understanding what's happening in the Middle East, etc., etc. So if it is a motion that's incredibly, incredibly complicated, like for example, a motion you have no idea about, like I'll steal one that I think most people will not understand. This House believes that the CPP-NPA in the Philippines should probably stop the civil war. No info slide there. You are likely to not know anything about it, right? Because it's very, very specific. I'm pretty certain that people from my country as well might not know what the specifics of it are. In that instance, it might be hard. It might be hard to prioritize things, or there might be a lot of clashes. So what you can do is to go through each part of the opposing team's case, and this is what we were talking about the parts of the argument as promised earlier. So the first thing you can do is reject the premise. The premise is the basis of the argument. So how you can reject the premise is to explain why the claim is actually bad. So explain why the premise that they have is probably untrue, or probably even if it were true, it's not likely to be like very good for their case. So you just utilize goal number one, but you use it for the premise. So the basis of the argument. The reason why it's good to attack the premise is because the premise is often the strongest part of the argument. So everything is based off of it. The mechanism is only based on the premise. The impacts are based on mechanism. Or even if the mechanism fails, a lot of arguments are reliant on the premise. So if you disprove the premise, you are likely to be winning over them already because you take down everything else in the debate. It's kind of like a pyramid. If you take down, a pyramid, if you take down the bottom part of it, the whole thing collapses. Or I guess the more appropriate actual analogy is the building, like the foundation blocks of it. If you take them out, they kind of just fall. Easy, efficient, and you're able to like prioritize this as above everything else because you still have more time for other things if you're able to take out the premise. The second thing you can do is disprove the mechanism. So I want to point out that this is also quite crucial. If you can't reject the premise, you can disprove the mechanism or explain why it does not actually lead to B. So how you do this is by giving reasons. So obviously you give structural reasons at any point in time. That's the meta that we have now. But when you're disproving the mechanism, it's very good to look at, is this really what the actor does? Is this really what the characterization of the actor is? Is this really about their incentives, or is this really how they like it to work? Second is this really the dynamics of different people within the motion? Is this the dynamics of different things in the motion? Or lastly, is this likely to succeed? Because if it's not, then the mechanism just kind of falls apart. And you can do those things, explain different parts of it. The reason why it's important to do that is because usually mechanisms are the ways that judges are able to credit arguments. So I can only credit the argument of social change in the environmental movement motion if I'm able to mechanize it. If you don't mechanize it, that's what is called an assertion. That's really bad because it's not great for debates. And if you disprove the mechanism, you explain why their side is just an assertion, and therefore it takes down all the rest of their impacts. So you're able to co-opt it. Again, if you're not able to reject the premise, at least you're able to disprove the mechanism. Give a response as well. Even if the mechanism exists, why is it still bad? But the important thing is you take out the mech. And when you take out the mech, everything else follows, the impact follows, and that's why it's good. Like, that's why you become efficient about it. Okay? The third thing you can do is to minimize the impact. So maybe you can't reject the premise. Maybe you've tried to disprove the mech, but it might still not be enough. So you've done it, but it might not be enough to win you the debate. What you do is minimize the impact. You explain why the effect is actually less important than it actually is. We went over this already, but usually these are things that you already are likely to hear from the speaker before you. So if this is like something that you are unsure about, like you're not sure if this is what they prioritize, add them for good measure. It makes sure that you're able to at least engage with them in their best case. Then after that, or do the even if, do the weighing, aka even if it is the case that you protect some people, we protect more people, or you protect more vulnerable people. So these are just kind of like going through what we already talked about before, but they're specific to parts of the argument. And it's very crucial to, I think, do this in this particular order because it's from the most important response, the most crucial response oftentimes, aka the premise, towards the impact, which is, I would say, probably easiest to mitigate. You can't do all of this because if you try to do all of this for all the claims of the speaker before you, you're gonna speak until 20 minutes. But going through each part of it is good if you're uncertain which part needs to be prioritized. So like it's just good to spend more time on premise if that's what they like actually prioritize. And if you're not sure, then just take out the premise or take out the MAC. It's probably the most important thing. Hopefully that is clear. I understand it's a bit difficult. Sometimes it just ends up on vibes, but these often are very helpful in terms of just having at least a checklist of what you can think about. Example. So this house believes that the feminist movement should support traditionally feminine activities. So we're just copying the motion from earlier. So the challenge here is to find the different parts of the gov case. So the premise, aka the starting point, the mechanism, and then the impact. So I'll leave you guys to type in the chat or to unmute. Yeah. So I'll give a timer for around 60 seconds.
This would be that most women are socially conditioned to accept makeup.
Yeah, so sorry, could you repeat what that was? Like the socially accepted is a premise, mech, or an impact?
I think that is the premise.
Okay, yeah, that is correct. Is there anyone else who has thoughts about the other parts of the case? Broadly, that is correct. So I think if no one else has thoughts, I'll just.
The mechanism is that the mechanism is in like two parts. The first is that because most women are socially conditioned to accept it, they will feel more related with the movement now. The impact for this will be that we are now going to get more political capital. The second part of mechanism is that even if something bad comes out of it, we can still reclaim the momentum. And the
Beautiful.
impact for that is that we will mitigate that risk that will come.
Great job. Yes, that is perfect actually. So thank you so much, Havana, for like being able to go through it. So that's broadly what the case looks like. So the first thing you do is rebut the part about women are being socially accepted to accept this. That is a very hard thing to rebut, right? Because it just seems kind of true. It seems kind of intuitive. That is the reality of the Maitland. Most of the time, the premises are legit. And I wouldn't say it's very strategic to rebut this. But you can try to flip this. So I guess the weakest part of the case is possibly the MAC, right? The part about how they're going to relate to this. That's not actually explained. That's something you can attack and respond to and possibly prioritize, because that's how you're able to win the impact of political capital. Similarly, you can also just push the idea of self-image and why that's bad. And then like you can explain how it's actually unlikely that the feminist movement is able to reclaim these narratives because it's a time solution mismatch. You need political capital to be able to reclaim these narratives later on, but it's very hard for you to reclaim it at the start if you don't actually have the political capital. So you're never likely to reclaim this because at the point where you already have the political capital, you've already justified and like said that this is something that is legitimate, and therefore you're unable to get the second part of the mechanism. So I do think that the main response of political capital is probably the most important one, and then you can just add the second part about the mech fruit narratives, and then you can like weigh out the impact, say why it's less important. So yeah, thanks so much. So I think that's probably it for this particular part. So the next question is, I have everything, but how should I say it? And I said, sorry, these are a lot because when I was making this, it was like a really big slide. So I just split them up into like 6 different slides. So here are a few tips in structuring your rebuttals. The first tip I have is to cluster them. So we're very used to hearing whips should have issues or should have clashes. They aren't just structures for whips. Deputy should also devote important time to clear up debates because you need to make sure that the debate is cleared up before you introduce another thing. Because if it's like everything is a mess, you don't know where to position your extension into or position the rest of the responses into, it's not gonna be clarified to the judge. It's just going to be one random thing that just sticks. And the judge doesn't know how to weigh it out, kind of just lost on them. Make sure to cluster them per issue. If you're gonna be talking about rights, talk about rights of minorities. If you're going to be talking about change, talk about the mechanisms of change. If you're going to be talking about, I don't know, like what is most important for the political system for democracy or something like that, might be a less important value. Cluster that too. Be very disciplined in how you do it. Obviously, under those issues, you can structure it in a way that we were talking about: premise, mechanism, analysis, or you can just like do it very similar to the start of the lecture, where we're talking about direct attack, weighing, etc. Per part, but just make sure that they are clustered together logically and just they're together if they are targeted toward a very similar topic. Okay. And of course, you have to add the comparative. I'd say it's easier to give the comparative when you cluster them because now you know what you need to rebuild and you can kind of whip it. Like you can say, this is what PM said, I'll add 3 more reasons for why this is the case. The second tip I have in structuring rebuttal is to prioritize the most important part of the case at the start, especially if you're prone to overtiming. So there are only 2 types of debaters. The first one is a speaker who goes under 7 minutes, and the second is a speaker who goes above 7:15. Notably, the judge stops taking notes at 7:15. That is a hard rule. They can't take note of anything after that. And similarly as well, it's not very great if you're not using the maximum amount of time because it might mean that you are under responding to things or you're under building things. But if you're prone to overtiming, aka you're likely to spend too much time on one thing, you're gonna go overtime 7:30. Prioritize the most important thing because if you put it at the end, you're never gonna get to it, and therefore you're gonna lose. So it's often very, very good for you to respond to a very strong push from the other team. If you're leader of op, top of speech has to be response to the biggest PM claim. DPM, top of speech has to be the biggest response to the strongest response to the biggest LO push, or what LO forgot to talk about. Similarly, that's what you do at DLO. Similarly, that's what you do at GovWhip. Similarly, that's what you do at UpWhip. The reason it is important is if the speaker before you is very, very persuasive, you have to break the hypnosis. Judges believe speakers during rounds because they're average reasonable voters. And if the speaker was very persuasive, you need to snap them out of it rhetorically. You need to make sure that you are pointing out what was missing, pointing out why that was detrimental to them, especially if that's the most important push. So yeah, it allows the argument to be packaged better for the judge. It allows it to be easier to understand how you position yourself. You want to be the speaker who responds to the most important clashes, and that's what you should be doing. You don't want to be the speaker who responds to the least important clash, and that just takes you kind of very easily out of the debate. The third tip is making it logically coherent. So if, this is very similar to the part about clustering, but I just want to emphasize this. If you are talking about one issue, finish that issue. Wrap it up before trying to tackle another claim. When you finish the issue, that means including the weighing of it. Weighing is almost always at the end of the response. So the structure of a response would be what you are responding to, what your first response is, the most strong response or denial of or saying why it's untrue. The second is explaining why this is, even if it were true, is mitigatory, like you mitigate it, explain why that harm is symmetric, etc. The last is weighing. The reason why weighing is the last is because it allows you to position why that response matters. So the question you should be asking yourself is, why does this response matter? It matters because if you take down this argument, aka the premise, everything else of the argument of Gov follows, meaning that you're likely to be above them already because you're able to explain why all the rest of their mechanisms don't matter at the point where their premise is untrue. Usually you have to say it almost like that. Like you almost have to walk the judge through the debate, like almost verbatimly you have to say, the reason why this response matters is because of XYZ. Don't forget that, because that is probably the most crucial part of the response. Because that's how the judge will figure out why you matter. That's how the judge will credit you. That's how you win in the tightest of rounds. Very similarly, the fourth tip is to layer your responses to make them structured. There are two parts of this tip. The first is signposting. So I know this is a very common thing, like a very common thing that almost if you are hearing it, you might be laughing at me for even saying it here. But so many people forget it. When I'm on Google Docs with my partner, when we're prepping, I'm just always like, make sure you say this is point 1, 2, 3. Make sure you say that this is A, B, C. Because if you don't distinguish them, it's very hard for judges to figure it out if it's just a big blob of mess. So layer your responses, signpost where you are at in the case, and explain why you are doing that. So just very similar to what you said earlier. The second part of the tip is outside of signposting, make them layered. So make it smart in how you strategically use them. We talked a bit about this like already about you prioritizing denial first of the particular part of the argument, then weighing, etc. But it's also important to prioritize like what is logically important in the layer. So the first layer is the most crucial thing. The second layer is the lesser crucial thing. Why it matters, it's a lot more comprehensive. Aside from just saying it's not true because of X and then going straight to weighing, it's good to have different layers to make sure that you are catching up all the other material that is like part of the speech of the other team. More comprehensive responses are always good, but again, they are only important insofar as you also signpost them. So make sure they are both comprehensive and understandable. I think this is the 6th. No, I have 7. So this is 6 of 7. So the 6th tip is make sure you always weigh your response at the end of this. I already talked about this. I'm just going to skip about this, but believe me, this has changed lives. Believe me, this has made judges' lives easier. your team is likely to be favorably viewed, the time you spend here is never time wasted. So make sure you spend that time. So there's the actual 6th tip of 7 side. Worst case, no idea what to do. Go chronological. This isn't ideal, but it at least gives you a structure. If you're DPM, you have no idea what just came out of the LO's mouth, and you're unsure what they're saying or unsure what you need to prioritize, you can go chronologically. It's either top to bottom, aka 1st minute to 6th, or you can go 7th minute to 0 minutes. So like start with what they just last said and then go backwards from that. Either way works if you just really don't know what to prioritize. I would say it's good because you have a structure still that makes sense to the judge rather than just listing random thoughts. So yeah, again, sorry, that was quite a lot, but that's just, I think, how you can package your responses at the point where you already know how to engage with it. Speed run. So this is an exercise again. I'm not super sure we have the time for this though. So I just encourage you to take a screenshot of this. These are motions from the LSE Open 2021, and it's not endorsed by them. I just find them very interesting motions. So the first motion is a motion between extending the lifespan of people versus palliative care and the prioritization of modern medicine on that. The second motion is remote work good in the absence of a pandemic, or should you like push for physical work for majority of people? The third thing is about a very, very specific thing, very specific IR. And for context, this was a tournament in February. That's why it's a bit more relevant there. But it's this House believes that the election of Joe Biden is in the interest of Israel. Notably, the comparative isn't very clear. But quite obviously, it's just Donald Trump. You kind of have to defend Donald Trump there because Donald Trump's the only one that Joe Biden was fighting against. So explain what the interests of Israel are. That is one of the biggest clashes, because you have to explain what Israel is actually composed of, what their interests are, and why the election of Joe Biden is good. So a very fun clash. I think it's very fun. The fourth thing is about the LGBT movement and family values. There are a lot about the social movement and a lot as well about the individual people within those movements. The reason why these matter is because you know what you have to prioritize when you see a motion. You know what the main clashes are. You know what the team is likely to want to prove. You know what are threats to your case. And it's a very good exercise to just go through as many motions as you can often and just kind of figure them out. Why is that good? It helps you in vetoing. I'd say it's just really, really helpful. And I'm saying this as well as CA for Summer GI. Make sure that you only spend 5 minutes for vetoing. And it's easier when you kind of figure out what the clashes are. You don't have to prep completely, but it's helpful to know what the burdens are. Second is for responsive B. It's good for responsive speakers. It helps you be a bit more efficient. It also just kind of helps PMs be more preemptive. And then lastly, it's very helpful for when you structure your speech already because you link it back to what is important in the debate. So yeah, I'm sorry I wasn't able to, I find this really fun. It's just, I think we might have too little time to be able to go through this. The last thing, I think this is the last, and I promise this is the last probably. Yeah, it's the last one. How do I know if I've rebutted enough? This is the last before we go to the break. So there's a common question of when do I stop? So the short answer is you'll probably know after you distinguish what you have to prioritize. So when you've talked about the clashes, you know what you have to take down. If you've taken it down, you're already rebutting enough. So in your brain, you kind of have to think of it like a domino. If you take down X, you have taken down the core of the case, and thus you're already ahead. The tip here is, I know it's a bit hard to do this, but the tip here is just try judging, because I think it's judging that makes you force yourself to understand the case and how cases interact. If not judging, it's really fun to watch rounds. I have my own favorite speeches that I'll talk about in the last part of this particular workshop after the break. But yeah, that's just broadly it. You will know when you've rebutted enough if you have taken down the two main questions of what is important to their case and what is hurting your case. Longer tip. First is figure out how the argument structure works. If you've taken out the core of the rebuttal, then you're probably good to go. Probably doesn't mean that you have to spend too much time. Probably means that if you have at least one layer of even if and one layer of weighing probably good to go. Second tip, make sure you take the even if and wait out. If you're unsure when to stop, stop when you've given them everything they want. That means, and this is linked to the first tip, if you have explained why, even if you concede 90% of your benefits, why is their case still worse than your worst case? So I hope that makes it a bit clear. Obviously, this is a common thing that people have, and this is one of the first questions I had when I was helping out my novs in RSOC. But broadly, it's just balancing what you have to do, and usually, like, you'll know it's most effective as you go through it with practice. So I think the next slide is a bottom line. Final thoughts. Make sure you know what you need to respond to. And that's why the first part of the second chunk about listening matters a lot. Structure your rebuttal in a way that's judge-friendly. So there are a lot of components of rebuttal. The first is making sure you are representing them correctly and listening to them well. The next is actually doing the rebuttal, figuring out rebuttal. The last is, when you're saying the rebuttal, packaging it in a way that makes sense to the judge and can be credited. Rebuttals only matter as much as the weakest link in the panel understands and credited. And that's why judges are so important. Don't let your rebuttals be a waste by not making them impactful and clear. Rebuttals are the best when they're the most efficient. So you tackle a lot of things in the least amount of words. And that just really comes with practice, honestly. But, you know, it helps. Hopefully the things that we talked about, like figuring out what matters the most, prioritizing the premise, and then the MAC, and then the analysis, and just figuring out what the most important clashes to and are would ideally help. So are there questions on structuring rebuttals? So you can type down your questions. But for now, we'll have a 2 to 3 minute sanity break. I know we have, I think, around 10 minutes or ish left, or 15 minutes ish left. Forgive me, because I guess we started a bit late and we have some tech trouble. We do have the second part of the lecture, the third part of the lecture, just the speeches part. I'll be getting water. Ideally, you should also just be taking breaks, but you can type in the chat. I'm not going to be wearing my headphones, but type it in the chat and we'll get back to it as soon as the 2 to 3 minute sanity break is done. Cool? Okay, I'll get water now. Type in the chat if you have any questions. I'll see you guys in a sec. And just show how we can apply this in rounds, like actual rounds. The kittens are cute. Doggos are cute. Ducks are cute. Rabbits are cute. Adorable. So hopefully the pictures didn't distract you from asking questions. So I'll just assume that there aren't any. Now, the last part, the beauty of responsive speeches, and I love responsive speeches so much, partly because I don't love doing PM, although I have been forced to do that, and I understand there's some beauty to that too, but responsive speeches are, for me, very fun because, as I pointed out, they are some of my favorite speeches to give, particularly deputy speeches. What are responsive speeches, especially just for the purposes of this particular lecture? Technically, all speeches except for PM are responsive speeches, but there are different things you have to care about per speech. So, for example, in the PM speech, maybe you will have to still respond. Like, obviously, you'll have to respond to POIs, you'll have to be preemptive, and you'll need to weigh your arguments so that you can win as early as PM. But we won't focus on PM speeches because the way that they respond is quite different. There are a lot of other lectures out there that help you understand how to preempt, etc. I'm not going to cover that. What we are going to cover are 3 parts. So the first is the category of first response. The first response speeches are LO and DPM, as I pointed out before, because LO is the first speaker to deal with PM. The reason why that matters is if leader of op ignores PM, DPM will add on to the material that PM already has and respond to LO. That is 14 minutes of material that DLO has to deal with. DLO is going to likely be backed into a corner, is unlikely to be able to take it down, especially if these engagements come from a very good team. DLO will be overwhelmed and is unlikely to be able to tackle everything. So at that point, GovWhip will just have to deal with it, point out all the flaws, respond to them, and that is now 21 minutes that op-whip has to fix. So LO matters because if LO doesn't engage, it hurts the rest of the op bench. Similarly, DPM. So DPM has to respond to LO because op has a very, very unique weapon. That is called the op block, and it's there on the slide. The op block is the last 1 minute of op whip and the full 4 minutes of op reply. That makes 5 minutes for uninterrupted op speeches. In my circuit, we have something called the mandatory POI. I've been informed that I think in some Indian circuits it already exists as well, where if it's already being raised, the judge will interrupt you audibly. But that is not the case for a lot of instances, and that is why the op block is so important. Like, because there are instances where the op whip just doesn't take POIs, or if you don't raise a POI, that is not just 5 minutes of protected time. That is 7 plus 4, 11 minutes of protected time that is insulated from any engagement. So powerful. If DPM doesn't respond to LO, DLO punishes DPM for doing that. DLO adds analysis to LO. GovWhip is overwhelmed. GovWhip is the only speaker between DLO and OpWhip. So GovWhip can be the only one who pushes against the op block. So if DPM doesn't respond, GovWhip will be overwhelmed. It's very likely that you're going to be on the back foot if you don't do that. So LO and DPM are very crucial as first responders. They're kind of like frontliners basically. DLO and GovWhip are similar in that they have to do a lot of cleanup, and that is why it's very important to not overwhelm them, because they have to do a lot of push and weigh. Obviously, there's a lot more weighing that has to be involved, but DLO is very fun. I love DLO. I'll talk about it in a bit, but DLO weighs, DLO responds, and DLO gives the extension. The reason why DLO is crucial is because you already know 2/3 of the Gov case. And most often than not, that's probably the majority of the Gov case, because obviously GovWhip can't build, right? So DLO knows what the case is, knows everything about it. They cannot build anymore. You need to wait out and resolve it, because if you don't resolve it, GovWhip's gonna resolve it. You need to make sure you are clear with why you are winning and solidify it. That's while the op block is the 5 minutes. The op block actually starts at DLO, because DLO is able to resolve everything already and add an extension. At that point in the debate at DLO, everything's already messy because you've had 3 speeches. You have to clear it up. You have to clear it up in favor of your team, and then you have to weigh it out in favor of your team, and then you probably can add an extension as well if you have the time to and you have the brain cells to do that. Next, GovWhip. GovWhip is very similar to DLO, I'd say, because that's only when you have 2/3 of the case of op. Unique place, because it's the only time where you actually know what op is actually running. And so at GovWhip, you have to be extremely charitable, very good at weighing. You're not gonna make an extension, obviously, because that is not within your job. But GovWhip has to be destructive. GovWhip has to be able to make sure the strongest pushes are brought back. And that is a very similar thing. You need to kind of clean up the debate a lot in both of those speeches. And that's why if LO and DPM are crucial in making sure the debate goes on track and making sure that they are able to firstly respond to everything for the bench, DLO and GovWhip have the most power in pushing their case. So they're unique in that way. Like, if you overwhelm them, it's bad. But if they're able to clean up the debate, that's massive. That's like Thanos snapping his fingers. It's done. Those are deal breakers. And I honestly love very good DLO to GovWhip engagements because they are beautiful. I also love LO TPM engagements. I love responses. Sorry. OpWhip is unique, and I also love OpWhip. Perhaps OpWhip and GovWhip are kind of similar in that, kind of clear up stuff. DLO, GovWhip, OpWhip, very fun. But op whip is uniquely powerful because, again, of the op block. Strategy is the name of the game for op whip. And while I would say it's probably less of like very first response, it's the opposite of LO and the opposite of DPM. Op whip is everything is already said. All the responses are possibly weighed. The only speaker that you ideally should be responding to is the Gov whip, because ideally your first two speakers have already engaged with the other Gov speakers. So at op whip, you focus on strategy, you focus on weighing things out, pushing and making sure that like these things matter, and like setting up the debate for up reply to start weighing it out and start framing why you win. So up whip is crucial. Ideally, you don't want debates to be decided by up whip. You want debates to be decided as early on, because if you already won the debate at PM or LO or DPM, then the matter is just about increasing the margins. But in debates where it's very, very tight, up whip has the last constructive say. That's why it's good, or that's why it's important. Okay, so we'll chat about each of them. And I'll ideally just go over them by 6 minutes. So leader of up, how do you respond at leader of up? Leader of up's struggle is time management. You have to do a lot of shit. You don't have to do a lot of things. The most crucial job therefore is clarity. You need to do very similar things to PM setup. So I guess PM and LO are similar in the way that they have to construct debate, but LO is unique in the way that they have to engage. So you need to be clear with the stance, you need to be clear with the response, and you need to be clear about the main case. These are a lot. I personally find that LO and Gov Whip are the parts of the round where you have so much to deal with. Well, Gov Whip more in DP, but like so much material you have to deal with. Why is this? How do you fix this? Argument timings are crucial. So you need to have a maximum. My ideal is you have a maximum of 2 to 3 minutes for setup and extraneous response already together. If there are responses that don't fit to your case, put that in the first 2 to 3 minutes. If there are other parts that you have to respond to, it should be integrated in your speech. The best advice I've gotten is the best prep for LO speeches should already be things that are responsive to the PM speech. So you should have written down the PM's the LO speech already during prep in mind, with like already preempting the PM speech, and that's why you don't have to adjust too much. Notably, as pointed out earlier, you have to listen to the speech right before you. If you're doing LO, you have to listen to PM very clearly. If there are parts of the case that we're missed out on, add to it. But ideally, everything else should be clashing clearly. The second thing to note for LO is the struggle of LO, especially just broadly, not just the struggle of LO, but the struggle of first responders is you might face an unexpected case. So there might be teams that either have wrong definitions and therefore you have to def chal it, or B, they have right definitions, but it's not what you prepped. Like it might just be different. If it's a def chal, you challenge it, but like call it out and then explain why, even if it were the correct definition, why it's still wrong. But if it is not a def chal, and if it is a fair definition, which is the majority of the time, you unfortunately do need to adjust. The beautiful part of PVC is if it is unexpected, DLO, up whip, up reply can adjust. But in the worst case, you should just handle the unexpected case as though you are unable to hear it. Like listen to it, try to outweigh it, try to figure out the best ways to push the frame, and then just run the case that you prep. Make sure it's not contradictory, but ideally you're buying the time anyway for the latter speakers to be able to adjust. Make sure that you're just prioritizing the most important response. I want to flag here that the slide we had on prioritization is probably most important for LO, because again, LO has the least amount of time to respond across off bench. DLO has enough time to do 4 minutes of response, 5 minutes of response. Up whip's whole speech is gonna be response. LO has 3 minutes. Make use of it the best way. Make use of it with the most important responses. So if it's unexpected, just find the most important part of that case. The last thing is just if you're already preempted by PM, it just needs to be weighed out. I love PM too because PM has the most power, but PM doesn't have a say in how you're gonna weigh it later on. So what you do is you acknowledge the preemptions, explain why those preemptions have been destroyed by your case. Okay? So yeah, framing is a very important push. My personal favorite or my recommendation for a PM speech is probably, I really, really like the Austral Semi with Ateneo de Manila and ANU for Monash 2020. But I also really, really enjoy the UADC Bangladesh 2020 finals, also involving Ateneo, but the Ateneo de Manila versus Taylors. Outside of that, broadly, there are a lot of LO speeches that I think are very great. You can just look through them, but I really, really like the semi for Australs because they had to do a lot. It was a very messy debate, but if you watch the LO speech, you see the strong attempts to make it clearer. If you watch the UADC final one, I think that's a good speech in terms of utilizing both response and constructive material. Great. So hopefully that's clear. Next up is Deputy Prime. So Deputy Prime responds very similarly to LO. So while deputy speeches are similar in structure, meaning that there is no required structure for DPM and DLO because you don't need to give a stance, you're not allowed to def chal. It's in the words of my friend, it's 7 minutes of deputy styles. So it's up to you how you style it. But I'd say that for deputy, what you do is rebut, extend. Rebut, extend. Crucial things, don't forget them. In deputy PM, what you do is probably the ratio is like, I'd say 4 minutes of response to 3 minutes of extension. Up to you, but the important thing is, and this is something I want to note, for DPM for me, if you're like me, you have trouble building, I have a hard limit. Extension has to come out at 4, exactly 4. Has to come out at 4. If it doesn't come out at 4, or if there's too much LO I have to deal with, come out at 4:30. I should not go to 5 without having an extension because that's going to hurt my team because I need to add additional stuff to the case. So deputy speech, so yeah, that's just how I would think about it. Obviously, it's good as well to introduce new stuff prior to that or interweave the responses in your new stuff. That's perfectly fine, but you need to make sure that the ratio still makes sense. So that's just what I'd say in general for deputy, specifically for deputy prime. However, for deputy prime minister, you need to prioritize crushing the previous speaker's frame and defending your stance. If again it is unexpected, use the same tips as LO. But you have more time now, so prioritize the most important thing to respond to. If it is completely unexpected, make sure that you are giving the most pain to LO. Like the core thing that they're doing, do the most work in rebutting that. Then add other stuff that you might think might be helpful. And defend the stance, like rebuild PM as well if there was a very, very strong response from LO. So I'd say if there's a very unexpected thing, it's probably unlikely to be responsive to PM because it's very likely to be very different. But if it is the case that is unexpected and has taken down the PM speech, rebuild. You need to rebuild, defend the stance, extend. So specifically here, you need to resolve the unexpected case and defend the PM speech. The ideal is that the PM speech has already been front-loaded with the important material, so DPM just weighs out most of it. It's also helpful if you cluster your issues. One of the favorite speeches I've had, unfortunately unrecorded, but I judged it, was DPM like just pointing out 3 broad things from the op case and then dealing with each of them. Clustering issues is very important and very helpful because DPM often has to do a lot of work in reconstruction. So it helps to say, okay, issue 1, this is what they said. This is what PM said. They were unresponsive because of X. I'll add other responses. And even if it were the case of XYZ, this is the additional extension or the additional reconstruction that you get from me. So yeah, so favorite DPM speeches, I really like Amrit's speech in the Australs Monash finals, ANU versus Sydney. If you are interested in the environmental movement motion of working with corporations, that is the motion here. Very good speech. I'll also note, if you like PM speeches, that was a very beautiful PM speech, I'd say. Distinctly here, of course, the best speaker of that final was Deputy Prime Minister. Not surprising, it was a great speech. My other favorite Deputy Prime Minister speech is the Australs-Malaysia final speech. Although this style is a bit less common now, it is a very interesting speech, very engaging. I liked it a lot. I also really liked the DLO speech there, but I'll talk about that in a sec. Unfortunately, the other DPM speeches I have are like very good BP speeches, which are quite different. If you have a copy of the World's Korea 2021 semi-final with the two Ateneos, it's really interesting that my favorites are Ateneos, but I really, really sincerely love the DPM speech there. I think it is one of the perfect DPM speeches in the semi for the K-pop motion. But if you don't have it, it's perfectly fine because it's BP. It's a bit different from TVT anyway. On that note, I do think that the difference between DPM and BP and AP is just DPM and AP has a lot more flexibility. In BP, you kind of have to figure out closing themes. Now you don't have to figure out closing themes. You can just deal with responses a lot and just give an extension. So yeah. So that's it for first responses. Again, it's about prioritization and first responses, crushing the previous speaker. How do DLO and DPM differ? So I'd say in DPM, if there's a completely new frame, you flag it as something as like, you can say stuff like, the weird reframe we get from LO is this. The reason why it's weird is XYZ. It doesn't engage, etc., etc. That's why you have to be punished, even if that's the frame that you buy, blah, blah, blah. At DLO, you can't do that. If it is a weird case, you have to deal with it in issues. And this is where I talk about resolutions, Deputy Leader of Opposition, and GovWhip. How do you resolve or respond at DLO? DLO and BP and AP is quite similar. You have to clear up the debate, push the counterfactual, aka what the alternative world is. It's very whippy. But the good part about DLO and AP is that there's less need to extend and take out a closing theme. So you can prioritize propping up your issues while adding new comparatives. So what I say here is DLO is probably, remember the thing I said, for 4 minutes of response, 3 minutes of engagement. You can kind of figure it out, kind of fix it around. It's just a maximum hard line for me at DPM. At DLO, the extent is a bit more different. I'd say you can go as far as 5 minutes and then 2 minutes plus 15 seconds of extension. But you have to be good at extending if you want to do that. Like, obviously, the extension might not be as massive there. Obviously, as well, you can just kind of like cluster them in issues and then add engagements later on. But the important thing is clear up the debate. You have to clear up the parts where they were not engaging. You have to clear up the parts where the LO speech was not able to be responded to. And then you position your extension to why it is important. That is why I love DLO. It's so powerful. You clean it up and you have the power of being able to extend. It's like GovWhip, but being able to build, and it is chef's kiss. That's why you shouldn't let it go. Like, you shouldn't let go of that opportunity. The reason why I like it is because it fits with my skill set. Some people don't love it, but if you are DLO, use this unique opportunity. Because you have the overview of everything. Win it at DLO. The second thing to note in responding at DLO is crucial in being probably one of the most comparative speeches in the round, because you have the benefit of being able to see both stances. Whips will be too late to make the comparative. DLO needs to do the most even ifs. Not necessarily the most weighing. Don't believe my slide. I think I was a bit sketchy there. What I meant there was you need to do the most even if responses. And of course, weighing the responses of LO and DLO, but weighing can be done in WHIP. Prioritize even if in response. By virtue of that, you have the largest engagement power in the round. Good shit. You have to do a lot of resolutions for DLO. Similarly, so before I go to GovWhip, favorite speeches, Australs Finals, Malaysia, 2018. That was the best speaker of the final. I really like it. It's not what is currently common, as I pointed out earlier. But the thing is, the DLO speech is a very rhetorical speech, very good at pushing, very clear at what you want to resolve. Very good. Quite also like the DLO speech of UIDC. I mean, you just kind of see what, if I refer to the round. It's probably a good round anyway. So I also quite like the UADC final speech of Bangla. Yeah, so that's broadly. I also quite like the UADC 2019 finals. And the DLO speech there, I think, was really, really outstanding in resolving things. So if you have a copy of it, I know that it is on the UADC page of Facebook for 2019. Recommend it. So yeah, resolving at GovWhip. GovWhip is similar to DLO. For all the things I talked about, it's crucial because you have to push against the up block, as explained earlier. But I think GovWhip has a lot of different things that you can do, and I also love GovWhip. I mean, I love them. GovWhip needs to either be defensive by bringing back material that didn't engage with from PM and DPM. So this is the avalanche method. You bring back everything, bring back the dead, like the material that was missed out on. Now, OPWIP has to contend with all of that plus your responses to DLO's extension. Don't forget to respond to DLO if they do have an extension. That is very, very crucial. The second thing is you need to be on the offense by responding to the DLO speech charitably. I put it in these types because you have to be very, very clearly charitable, because that's the last time you'll ever be able to engage. You have to be good at even airs. You have to be clear at that. So you have to be defensive, or you can prioritize it if they don't actually respond. And you can be offensive. Don't be offensive like by saying problematic stuff, but like be on the offense by being able to respond correctly, making sure that you're not missing out on things. It has to be charitable because it's your last chance. If OPWIP rebuilds, then your rebuttal is unlikely to stand. So a lot is at stake at GovWhip and DLO. Make sure it's clear, make sure it is packaged correctly. And this is where I think issues matter the most. Favorite GovWhip speeches. UADC Bangla final, best speaker of the round was GovWhip, even if Gov lost. Good speech to watch. I will note though, GovWhip there, I think the reason why Gov lost, even if GovWhip was the best speaker, was that there was kind of new material that was hard to credit. So obviously it's not great in terms of dynamic, ideally. Ideally it's not what you'd want, but I think Gov and Up there are both outstanding, but I think the GovWhip speech there uniquely was also great. Perfect. Love it. Up block, UpWhip. How do you respond at UpWhip? You often don't need to. The ideal is that DLO should have taken the bulk of the responses. You'll only ideally need to handle GovWhip. The important thing here is at UpWhip, you have the unique ability to point out the parts of the Gov case. Oh my God, I'm sorry. I think the slide got off, but what is supposed to be here is that you also have to point out the parts of the Gov case that simply cannot stand. Okay, so UpWhip responses, clear issues, resolutions. The resolutions, like, it's clearer than DLO because DLO's resolution is probably going to be contended by GovWhip, so you kind of have to like fix that. But you also need to just weigh things out. Charitable in the sense that even if you believe everything from the three speakers of Gov, why are still your values more important? Second, explain and restate the parts that were missing coming from the previous speakers, like things that were not responded to and not highlighted, and why does that win you the debate? And lastly, I think you do have the leeway on WHIP to add responses. Because it's still a WHIP speech, there's still replies. Obviously, the responses have to be derivable from the previous speakers, but you utilize that unique power of yours to use the responses to take out the parts that GovWhip said was not responded to. Creditable, good. Why is this good for you? Up block. If you have responses at UpWhip and the weighing, UpReply's job is a lot easier because UpReply's job can bring back the ways that DLO resolved the issue. So I'll note, UpWhip can bring back PM, especially if PM was less responded to. UpReply can bring back the DLO speech, meaning that you have the full force of 4 speeches in 5 minutes, and you kind of just win the debate. Obviously, it differs from round to round, but the important thing here is that you're able to sort out how you win. You can be incredibly generous at whip and reply, and that makes it likely that you're going to win the debate on a massive margin. That is why it's uniquely powerful. And that is the beauty of the up block. Up whip is great. Up block is greater, and winning an up across all 4 speeches at LO is the greatest. So yeah, that's it for me. I feel like I'll just temper this a bit before I end by saying that I think both benches are equally great. If you are a more constructive team, front loading everything at PM makes you win the debate. DPM uses the same things. You overwhelm the op bench. If you're a more responsive team, you will likely be better on op, but the important thing to note is you need to be comparative and you need to be charitable. Yeah. So yeah, fun stuff. I love talking about debate. I'm sorry, this is quite long, but that is the end of the workshop. Now I think we can chat about Q&As if anyone is still here, because I think it's quite a long time already. I'm sorry about that. But yes, thanks so much everyone for listening. If you have questions, we can drop it in the chat. I'm glad. I hope that helps. You guys can also just message me over WhatsApp. If you have questions, I'll drop my number there. But don't spam me. Like, don't spam me with like random messages. Like I recall I dropped it in the chat once where there was a debate, and then I started getting like some random numbers, like not even about debate. So let's chat about debate. If you have other questions as well, you can message me over Facebook. My name is Bea B. Legaspi. And I have a display photo where it's just my face and it's like violet. Otherwise you can type in the chat. But if not, we can just, get our dinners.
Would you please just drop this presentation somewhere so that we can access it as well?
For sure. Give me a sec. Yeah, I can send it to I think I can send it to Aisha because I have the
Yeah.
Great,
That
sure.
works.
Will do. Hope you guys have fun with the PowerPoint. No worries. I hope it helps, and I hope you guys have fun with responsive speeches. I love responsive speeches. I hope you guys also love them with me. No worries. Okay, great. So I think you should be more or less cool with everything. So I'll just send it out to you guys, and I'll see everyone. Bye-bye.